Are you serious? Aunt Lorraine's voice cut through the hum of laughter and clinking glasses at Grandma's living room. My hand froze mid-reach for the cheese platter. I glanced around the room. There was Uncle Bert, leaning back in his recliner, eyebrows raised so high his toupee threatened to slide off. Cousin Daphne choked on her mocktail, eyes wide as saucers. Even Grandma, perched in her favorite armchair clutching her knitting, looked scandalized. I cleared my throat. Yes, I am serious. A hush fell over the gathering. Somewhere in the distance, the lawnmower idled, and a dog barked. But inside, the clock ticked so loudly I could almost taste the seconds. My palms were slick against the envelope I held in my hand, the envelope that would change everything. It had started innocently enough. I'd flown in from Sydney earlier that morning, suitcase rolling behind me through the front door, greeted by the familiar smell of peach jam and old books. Grandma's house was exactly how I remembered. The same floral wallpaper, the same clutter of framed family photos, the same feeling of being the odd one out. From the moment I arrived, whispers had followed me. Poor Lily, a cousin had murmured. Still in that apartment, huh? Aunt Lorraine had tutted, shaking her head. Maybe you should have become a teacher like your sister. My cheeks had burned, but I held my tongue until now. I stepped forward, heart hammering. I invited all of you here today for one reason, I announced, voice steady though my knees threatened to buckle. Because you all seem to think I'm poor. A chorus of polite coughs rippled through the room. Poor? I echoed, as though tasting the word. Let me enlighten you. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope, thick and embossed with a logo no one recognized. I stood by the fireplace, Grandma's vintage clock ticking approval, and carefully slid the contents onto the mantel. Is that? Uncle Bert squinted at the paper, peeking out. It's a real estate contract, I said, unfolding the document for everyone to see. For the land behind Grandma's house. Gasps erupted, like popcorn kernels. Daphne's jaw dropped. Uncle Bert scooted forward, peering over my shoulder. Aunt Lorraine drew in a sharp breath, hearing the number before she processed its magnitude. You bought it? She whispered, voice small. I nodded. Last month. 30 acres. Zoned for development. I'll be building a boutique eco-village. Think solar cabins, community gardens, wellness retreats. Pre-sales start next week. Silence. Then Grandma's knitting needles clicked once, twice, and she looked up, blinking. My little Lily, she whispered, tears glistening. You've grown into quite the woman. That was the moment the laughter started, and not the mocking kind. One by one, they stood approaching the mantel, as if drawn by magnetic force. Questions flew. How much are you selling the cabins for? Are you collaborating with that sustainable startup in Melbourne? Do we get family discounts? The shift was electric. The same people who had dismissed me now hovered eager for scraps of my success. And I realized, standing there in my well-worn jeans and a blouse that I'd splurged on just for today, that I had never felt more powerful. Aunt Lorraine was the first to recover her composure. She tapped her manicured nail against her wine glass. Well, Lily, this is unexpected. I suppose I owe you an apology. I raised an eyebrow. I was going to ask you to buy a plot, Aunt Lorraine. Her face paled. Oh, that's different. She looked as though she might faint. Cousin Jasper, always the prankster, sauntered over, flipping through the contract. Nice work, lil sis, he said, grinning. I guess all those nights you spent glued to your laptop in that shoebox apartment paid off, huh? I smiled. I guess they did. He nudged me playfully. So what's it like being a big-shot developer? Exhausting, I admitted, but it's worth it. The sunlight slanted through the bay window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. It felt surreal, like living in a movie for once. For years, I had been the invisible cousin, the one who struggled to pay rent, the one whose career in sustainable housing development sounded like a pipe dream. But here I was, proof that dreams could be built from nothing more than grit, determination, and a knack for spreadsheets. Uncle Bert cleared his throat. Do you have any other projects on the horizon? He asked, voice cautious. I'm in talks to redevelop the old textile mill in town, I said, turning it into affordable housing for young families, and maybe a co-op market space on the ground floor. A murmur of admiration rippled through the crowd. The textile mill was a blight on Main Street. Boarded windows, graffiti, the place where kids dared each other to walk through at night. The idea of breathing new life into it had apparently captured everyone's imagination. Daphne hovered at my elbow, eyes shining. Lily, could you give me a tour of your eco-village once it's built? I've been thinking about my woo-woo yoga retreat concept. I laughed. Of course, and I'll give you first pick of plots too. She clapped her hands, bouncing on the balls of her feet. Yes, thank you. Grandma shuffled over, knitting in hand. Sweetheart, she said softly. I knew you could do it. Never stopped believing in you. I knelt and hugged her. She smelled like lavender and mothballs, and the sun-warmed breeze of our childhood summers. Thank you, Grandma, I whispered. I wouldn't be here without you. She patted my hair, still messy from my rush to get here this morning. Now, she said, straightening, let's celebrate. And celebrate we did. Bottles of wine were opened. Plates of tiny sandwiches disappeared in minutes. Laughter echoed down the hallway as Cousin Jasper and his girlfriend, Mia, reenacted scenes from my contract meeting as if it were a Broadway show. Aunt Lorraine offered to help me pick paint samples. Uncle Bert bragged about being my unofficial broker to anyone who would listen. But as bright as the moment was, I felt a pang in my chest. The project was real, yes, but it represented so much more, a return ticket on an emotional roller coaster. Because 4 years ago, when I left Sydney to start my career, everyone here thought I was chasing pipe dreams. They saw my unpaid internships, the goat cheese I bought instead of steak dinners, my refusal to climb the corporate ladder at a faceless firm. They saw me as poor. I rose from the sofa, glass of rosé in hand, and tapped my spoon against my glass. Glasses clinked. Silence followed once more. I have something else to share, I said, voice falling low. This story isn't just about buying land. It's about why I did it. Eyes fixed on me, the room leaned in. Sometimes I wonder if people really listen, or if they're just waiting for their turn to talk. But tonight they listened. 2 years ago, I began. I had a breakdown. I'd spent every cent I had on that first plot, living on coffee and dreams, and it wasn't enough. My bank account was empty, my confidence shattered, and I realized that if I didn't take risks, I'd always be that poor cousin everyone pitied. I paused, drawing a breath. How much should I reveal? But their eyes were kind now, curious and encouraging. So I pitched the eco-village concept to investors. Hundreds of phone calls, dozens of sleepless nights. I faced rejection after rejection, emails calling me naive, investors calling me crazy. But then, one chilly morning in London, I got a call from Green Horizons Capital. They asked to sign a term sheet. I nearly passed out. Laughter bubbled up. You'll have to tell us more about London, Aunt Lorraine said. I grinned. Another time. But that call changed everything. Suddenly, I wasn't just Lily the struggling graduate. I was Lily the go-getter. I could feel shoulders relax, burdens lifting. Sometimes it takes a single success to rewrite the narrative, and rewriting narratives was my specialty. But the biggest risk, I continued, voice dropping, was coming home tonight. Walking through this door, knowing what they'd say. So I wanted to make sure I had the facts. The contract, the proof that poor was just a label. Aunt Lorraine dabbed at her eyes. Uncle Bert nodded slowly. Grandma smiled, with that mix of pride and relief that only grandmothers possess. I raised my glass. To labels, I said, and to crushing them. To crushing them. They echoed, voices bright. And for a few shining moments, I believed it, that I had crushed their expectations, my own doubts, and carved out a place for myself on my terms. As the night wore on, stories and congratulations flowed like the wine. I drifted through anecdotes of my project's challenges, the time my architect misplaced the survey plans, the week I nearly got evicted from my first apartment, the moment I realized sustainable living could be profitable. And they listened, truly listened, not as bored relatives, but as proud extended family. I caught Grandma's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." She winked and nodded. But somewhere between the second round of dessert and Cousin Jasper's impromptu charcoal portrait of me, with a hard hat, a creeping thought surfaced. Triumph isn't static. Today I held the contract. Tomorrow I'd have to face the real work of development, the skepticism of neighbors, the hurdles of planning approvals. Success was a journey, not a destination. Yet tonight wasn't about tomorrow. Tonight was about the moment I reclaimed my story. The room was warm, laughter wrapping around me like a blanket, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at home. I settled into the old sofa, letting the swirl of conversation wash over me. Someone was asking for details about the solar panels. Someone else wanted to know if I needed more help with the planning documents. The atmosphere was electric with possibility for my project, and for new relationships, rebuilt on a foundation of respect rather than pity. I glanced at the envelope, still perched on the mantel, its contents now public, its power unleashed. It contained more than legal definitions and zinc-infused paper. It contained a declaration that I would not be defined by anyone else's expectations. Aunt Lorraine drifted over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Lily," she said softly, "if you ever need anything, advice, a shoulder to cry on, someone to talk you down from a ledge, you know where to find me." I squeezed her hand. "Thank you. I'll hold you to that." She smiled. "And next time you come home, let's skip the speeches and just have tea, okay?" I laughed and nodded. "Deal." And in that simple promise, I felt the weight of the contract shift from my shoulders to something shared, a reminder that we succeed not in solitude, but in community. The laughter continued. Stories blended, borders between past and future blurred. I thought of the eco-village rising under southern skies, cabins glowing like lanterns in the dusk, community gardens flourishing with laughter and life. And I knew that just as tonight belonged to this house, so tomorrow would belong to what I built, brick by solar brick. Somewhere behind me, Grandma rose and offered her arm. "Come," she said. "Time for me to show you where I hid the cookies." I took her arm and followed her down the hallway, leaving the chatter behind. The cookies were legendary. Chocolate chip, still warm, the recipe passed down through generations. As she handed me a plate, I took a bite and closed my eyes, taste and memory intertwining. "Good?" she asked, eyes twinkling. "The best," I said. She nodded. "Just like my Lily." I smiled, crumbs at the corner of my mouth. "And I'll keep proving it." We stood there for a moment, two women bound by love and history, and the unspoken promise of new beginnings. Behind us, the family gathered, their voices a comforting backdrop. I took another bite of cookie, the sweet taste a perfect counterpoint to the sleek contracts and digital projections waiting for me. Tonight was a victory. Tomorrow would be another battle. But I was ready. Because I was no longer poor. I was Lily, and I was just getting started. The first light of dawn filtered through Grandma's lace curtains. When I woke, head still swirling with last night's revelations. I lay in the guest room, the contract still humming in the quiet of my mind. Success, as intoxicating as it was, brought its own weight, the promise of tomorrow. I slipped from the bed, careful not to wake Grandma, and wandered downstairs. The living room was empty, save for the remnants of celebration. Wine glasses on the mantel, a scattering of napkins on the coffee table, Jasper's ridiculous charcoal sketch rolled up in the corner. I poured a cup of tea and settled into the armchair, the same spot Grandma had occupied when she first announced she was proud of me. I closed my eyes and let the warmth seep in. Footsteps approached. Grandma appeared, hair in its usual messy bun, one slipper dangling untied. In her hand was the plate of cookies. Still warm, still chocolate chip perfection. "I thought you might need these," she said, settling across from me with a conspiratorial grin. "You remembered," I murmured, taking one. She nodded solemnly. "Never forget the little things, Lily. They ground you when the world spins too fast." I took a bite. The sweetness cut through any lingering anxiety. "Thank you," I said. "Last night was life-changing." She folded her hands. "It was more than that. It was your declaration. But declarations require follow-through." I sighed. "I know. The eco-village is one thing, plots sold, investors happy. But the textile mill is complex. The town council meeting is next week. There's opposition from locals who don't trust an outsider." Grandma's brow furrowed. "Then you'll prove them wrong, like you did last night." Her faith bolstered me more than any contract ever could. I stood and kissed her cheek. "Coffee," she offered. I nodded, and together we headed to the kitchen. Later that morning, I met with Dad in the front yard, where he was tinkering with his hedge trimmer. He looked up, surprised to see me. "Lily," he called, waving off the buzzing blades. "I should have been there last night, but work." I held out my hand. "It's okay, you sent flowers." He dropped the trimmer and came forward, enveloping me in a bear hug that nearly knocked me off my feet. "I heard everything," he said, voice thick. "I still can't believe you bought the land." I smiled. "It was time. But I need your help." "The textile mill," he raised an eyebrow. "That old eyesore, you never cease to amaze me." "Of course I'll help. You have my full support." Tears stung my eyes. "Thanks, Dad. It means a lot." He ruffled my hair. "You're my daughter. I'll always have your back." With our alliance sealed, I felt the final pieces click into place. I spent the afternoon drafting my presentation for the council, massaging the data, anticipating objections, rehearsing each rebuttal in Dad's front yard. By evening, exhaustion crept in, but determination burned brighter. The council chamber was a modest space: linen curtains, mismatched chairs, a dais of 5 stern faces. I stepped up, heart pounding beneath my tailored blazer. Opponents, mostly locals defending tradition, sat clustered to the right, arms crossed. To the left, a handful of eco-enthusiasts nodded encouragement. I cleared my throat. "Good evening. My name is Lily Thompson, and I stand before you to propose the revitalization of the old textile mill into affordable housing and community market space." I inhaled. I grew up in Sydney and have spent the last 5 years developing sustainable communities. I purchased the mill 6 months ago because I believe this town deserves opportunity, not blight. They listened. I walked them through my plans: passive solar heating, rainwater harvesting, local artisan stalls, each slide a testament to careful research and respect for heritage architecture. I anticipated concerns about traffic and noise, showing how I'd engage neighbors in design workshops. I cited case studies from similar towns that saw crime drop and commerce rise after such projects. At the end, I opened the floor. Councillor Bramwell, irony lining his voice, asked, "Miss Thompson, how do you ensure that affordable housing remains affordable over time?" I smiled, grateful. "We'll partner with a community land trust, capping resale prices to prevent speculative flipping. This model has preserved affordability in Portland for over a decade." Another question, then another. One by one, the skeptic's rigidity cracked. When I finished, a moment of silence, then applause. Not wild, but measured. Respect earned, not demanded. Councillor Davis stood. "I'd like to move approval with conditions." All in favor. A chorus of ayes followed. My chest swelled as relief washed through me. I stepped down, shaking hands and fielding congratulations. Jasper was waiting outside, snapping selfies. "You owned it," he cheered. I laughed. "Let's call that a win." That night, back at Grandma's, we celebrated again, this time quietly. I poured tea and told Grandma everything: how Bramwell had quipped about the big city princess. At first, how my answer had silenced the room, how it felt to earn their trust. Grandma nodded, knitting needles clicking. "You see, they needed proof you weren't just talk. Now they know." I leaned back, letting the satisfaction settle. "What I really learned," I said, "is that success isn't about shocking people once. It's about showing up again and again doing the work." She smiled. "And you have wonderful people around you now." I sipped my tea. "Including you." She raised an eyebrow. "Including me, of course." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. I held planning meetings with architects, walked the mill's dusty halls, imagining apartments, negotiated with the Heritage Society over preserving the original brick facade. Each challenge tested me, but each victory, securing a grant for energy-efficient windows, signing on the first tenants, felt sweeter because of the journey. Through it all, the family rallied. Aunt Lorraine offered interior design tips. She and Dad argued over tile choices. Jasper volunteered to handle social media. Daphne pitched yoga workshops for the village's community center. Grandma held evening gatherings at her house to host locals, building goodwill. What began as a vindication for me blossomed into a genuine family enterprise. One Saturday, I invited everyone to a tour of the mill. The interior was a skeleton, then bare beams, peeling paint, but the potential shimmered. We walked through the future lobby, the light-filled courtyard, the shared rooftop garden. Laughter echoed. Ideas flew. By the end, the initial skepticism among neighbors had melted. They saw not a developer, but a community member invested in their town's future. That night, we gathered at Grandma's house once more. I raised a glass. To milestones I began, voice thick with gratitude, and to the family that helped me reach them. They cheered. And in that circle of faces, some once doubtful, now joyful, I saw that the greatest success lay not in a contract signed, but in rebuilding trust, in turning poor into a label as outdated as the empty mill. Months later, as the first tenants moved into their apartments, I stood on the courtyard balcony, watching as families unpacked boxes and artists hung paintings in the market stalls. The air smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Below, children chased each other around planters, overflowing with herbs and flowers. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Dad. "You did it," he said quietly. I nodded, tears prickling. "We did it." He glanced at the skyline, where the eco-village dotted the horizon like a constellation of tiny homes. "Your vision took root." I smiled, and it gave back more than I ever imagined. He squeezed my shoulder and walked away. I turned back to the courtyard. Laughter, conversation, life unfolding. The mill stood transformed, a testament to risk, resilience, and community. And I thought of Grandma's words, "Never forget the little things." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small silver key, the master key to the first eco-village cabin, its serial number engraved. I traced the letters lightly. Hope, that was its name. I slipped the key onto my keyring, alongside the one for the mill's office. 2 keys, 2 projects, 1 journey, 1 label, Lily Thompson, developer, reclaimed and redefined on my own terms. As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the courtyard in golden light, I whispered a silent vow. There will be more challenges, more politics, more skeptics to convert. But I have the proof in contracts, in community, in every brick and beam, that determination can rewrite any narrative. And when the next family arrives at my eco-village, I'll greet them not as their landlord, but as a neighbor, one who once sat in this very room, called poor and dared to say otherwise. I pocketed the key, turned and walked toward the future, the echoes of laughter, and the promise of new beginnings guiding every step.